Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us here for another week here on KNZZ, KLG, KGLN, and, of course, the Internet and on our podcast, if you listen to this a little later on, which you can. This is Rick Wagner, just getting it right here. It's getting easier and easier to get it right, not because I'm so smart, but because the other people are so wrong. So it's pretty obvious. So quite the week, huh? Quite the week. I've tried to put some things together that haven't been talked about as much. I'll talk about on the show here and kind of touch on them because I think they are pretty important. You know, because after all, we're in a pretty challenging time here. This time is not like where we have a bad leadership situation. This isn't like Warren Harding or something like that. This is much worse. This is where we have incompetence and a political agenda that is counter to what we think of as our constitutional form of government. I know we hear all this stuff about the democracy. Yeah, you know what that means? No, I don't think anybody that says it knows what it means. We know what it means. But we also know that a democracy has many definitions in terms of what it is accomplishing and how it operates. A direct democracy, and we've talked about this many times, has been found to not be a very good idea. It's too whimsical. It's hard to actually sample what's going on. And the ideas that float in a direct democracy can be changed so quickly by demagoguery and, well, people now would say fake news. So we elect representatives to exercise our rights on their behalf to make certain decisions, our rights on our behalf. There we go. And we have usually a poor choice. And people who want to do that occasionally get very good ones. Once in a while you get mediocre ones. But a lot of the time you get not very good ones. And so you always have to keep your eye on them. And when we take our eye off of them, we end up with, Joe Biden. But there's a lot of ways things can go off the rail. And I thought, this may not be an advertisement, but Victor Davis Hanson has a new book coming out, The End of Everything. I've already ordered it. It's pre-order. And this was a little something he was talking about, how this Armageddon can come about in societies and civilizations. I thought I'd just run it by you. It's not very long.
There are innumerable ways that civilizations and their peoples can vanish from history. Sometimes natural catastrophes are to blame. Tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, plagues. But the moments that have resonated through history are the destructions of countries and cultures by warfare. The brutal fates of Thebes, Carthage, Constantinople, and the Aztecs of Tenochtitlan stand as a warning for the world, America included, that it is hardly immune from the tragedies of the past. From the vantage point of the 21st century, the idea of military obliteration can seem impossible. Those before us who faced the end of everything had the same reaction. Technology may have changed, but human nature is no different now than it was years ago. The Thebans, the Carthaginians, the Byzantines, and the Aztecs were annihilated by weapons that are now obsolete. But the agendas of destruction persist to this day, and only the methods of genocide, nuclear, chemical, and biological, are more advanced and at our fingertips. We have much to learn from those who were destroyed by war, particularly because the old mentalities and delusions that doomed them still are very much with us, especially the last thoughts of the slaughtered. It cannot happen here.
I thought I'd put that out there. Nice little discussion point. Kind of uplifting, isn't it? I just think that book is going to be great. That's why I've ordered it. You can pre-order it on Amazon. It's Victor Davis Hanson's The End of Everything, which sounds a little bit like a downer, but I think he's right on topic here, is you understand your own place in history when you understand history. If you don't, then you don't know where you stand. You don't know anything about yourself. You're just floating in some space without any reference points. And we have had the opportunity to have recorded, historically, all sorts of experiments in societies, in warfare, in getting along with inter-ethnic societies. All of this stuff has been tried in the past, sometimes in a variety of different ways to try to get to the same conclusion. But they have been tried, and we can examine those and see what's going on. Now, I know it's not fashionable these days, and I know that I talk about it a lot because I think that it's important. Many of you, when I talk to you, have a good grasp of history, especially American history, and have a working knowledge of the Constitution in many situations that I think exceeds some of the people that are in our Congress. Now, from time to time, there are people we see who are in high positions that don't seem to have any understanding of it all. And obviously, they've been chosen for some ideological or other reason. We talked about that. I mean, we played a little clip from Senator John Kennedy quizzing some of these Biden appointees to the federal courts, which are extremely powerful positions, more powerful than they ought to be, really, and have been found to be more powerful than people thought they were in the past, which always makes me wonder if some of the things have been done, like I always bring up, national injunctions from a district court, was even something contemplated by the framers. And we've never really addressed that as a question. It comes up, but how does a court in the Southern District of New York put out a injunction that affects the whole country? The idea of jurisdiction seems very confusing to me in that. So all of these things we can see impact us. Now, we know that one of the big problems with the Roman Republic was that, one, it was corrupt. Two, too much power was focused into the hands of the people in the Senate, and there was no real check on it to speak of. And things began to get worse and worse as individuals in the Senate and the wealthy and the powerful just began to accumulate more and more outside of any system that the regular citizen, and there were regular citizens, you had to be a landowner, and even if you had very little and you were a landowner or came from a landowning family, you would be a citizen, and you were part of what they used to call the head count, which was sort of a diminutive term for, well, you're a citizen, but we just count you because you don't matter as much. Well, they did matter, and having those people upset is something that Julius Caesar used to his advantage. And they were very worried about Caesar, not only because he seemed to be a bit of a demagogue, and maybe he was, but I don't think so. I think he was a keen observer of what was going on around him and saw what needed to be done in terms of speaking to the masses, the people who were being most oppressed at this point, and didn't seem to have a way out. So instead of trying to fix what was going on and take some of the power that Caesar was gathering away by taking away some of the problems, the Senate and a lot of the wealthy in Rome decided that they wanted to bring lawsuits against Caesar. So not only when he returned to Rome would he be subject to some vote in the Senate condemning him for some actions they decided they were going to go back and look at in Gaul, whatever the case might be, but he would also face civil problems in their court system, which were pretty sophisticated, and it was well known that you could get a lot of problems going by suing people in this period. And so he could not come back to Rome. He could not lay down his consulship. Because you see, if you were a consul of Rome, there were two this time, during the time of your consulship, while you were out doing other things, you were immune from lawsuits. And so Caesar stayed away. They kept wanting him to come back and lay down his consulship. He knew better. They would not negotiate with him. And so the choice was to go and essentially be destroyed or to march on Rome. Now, that is a foolish choice to make someone. Now, it's easier to see when we look back at it because they underestimated Caesar. but their reasoning was still flawed. Well, thanks a lot for sticking around, folks. Rick Wagner still with you here on Getting It Right. I hope that I wasn't too wondering in my thoughts in the first segment there, but I think that what I'm trying to say, and I hope it comes across, is that you have to be very careful when you go after political enemies and using the power of the state and essentially cornering them. Sometimes things don't go the way you want. I don't know how that translates into our situation right now, partly because we can't see where the end game on this is. But it's a dangerous, beyond unethical situation to use the courts system against a leader that you are worried about because he is popular with the masses. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Trump is popular with the masses. That's us. Yeah, we're the head count out there, as you say in Rome. And so that is always frightening to the people who will have the reins of power, because they realize that should this person continue in what they're doing, they're going to lose control of those reins of power. Now, in the case of Rome, they probably would have been much better off to give Julius Caesar some level of, let's say, freedom or relief from the legal system that they were going to employ, and negotiate something with him. Come on back. Let's talk about what's going on. Oh, no, don't worry. Now, whether you believed him or not, who knows? But the thing is, instead, they amped everything up to the point where there are only a couple choices left to them. And it doesn't mean that you're going to march on Rome. What it means is that you start cornering people so that their choices are much more limited. There's risk in that. Not everybody's just going to lay down and give up. And we see that with Trump. He continues to fight. And he continues to fight within the system. The left keeps trying to make it seem as though he's trying to fight outside of the system. He's trying to have an insurrection. He's trying to get the voting laws so that they're not fair. They're trying. Everything about it is to try and put him outside of the system that our framers came up with, to make it seem like he's an enemy of that. Instead, he is a protector of that. I really feel that way. For all of his, personal difficulties sometimes, a little bit of megalomania, stuff like that, he believes in the democracy and the republic, the constitutional republic, that the framers set up, and wants to preserve that foundation. And that's, I think, an interesting idea, too, is when I think of our society and our nation, we have a foundation. And obviously the foundation is the Constitution. And if you viewed it from the top, like you're looking down at a foundation, you would see the outline of 3 large pieces of the foundation, 3 big rooms. Each one of those would represent a branch of government. They'd all be the same size. And that's where, as you build your government, the powers and checks and balances for those different pieces of government were put in the Constitution. And then behind that, you have to have the Constitution itself as interpreted by the Supreme Court and set up the agencies of government. Now, that was a very small building for the framers afterwards. They didn't have all these executive agencies and this and that. But this little annex has now become as big or bigger than the pieces of government. That's a problem. There was also a small building that was very important when the foundation was initially laid, and that was one that had the Federalist Papers in it, because that was the words of the founders and framers about what the Constitution meant and why they put those things in there. So what we've seen is that this building has become outsized in one particular area. That is the administrative state, which was conceived to be very small. But over time, either because it benefited them, or they didn't know any better, or they don't understand human nature, that it's always trying to enlarge its own turf, those agencies have gone much larger than were ever envisioned. And you could see that if you look down at how these foundational principles are changing. At one point, they were just an annex off mainly the executive branch to implement a few policies. Now they've become practically dominating. They are as big, if not slightly bigger, than the three big rooms that represent the branches of government. This is an unsustainable situation if you're going to keep the integrity of what our nation is supposed to be about going forward. Because it was never designed that way. Our foundational principles are getting changed. We're turning into something that Woodrow Wilson wanted, an administrative state where everything is run by sort of bureaucratic tenders. People in charge of agencies, in charge of things that are in charge of you. That's how the administrative state functioned, as far as I can tell Woodrow Wilson's thinking on it. That government was far too important to be left to the people who were being governed. This is right at odds with the idea of the founders that the power of the government flowed from the people and was theirs. And so they had that power to make changes, and if they wanted to take that power back, they could. They could change the government in some way. The Constitution has things set up for that. It's a strange difference to think that you go from that idea to a situation where someone wants unelected bureaucrats. We hear this phrase all the time, unelected bureaucrats. But really think about it. What can you do about Merrick Garland? What can you do about Mayorkas or Buttigieg or any one of the dumbest people I think I've seen in a presidential cabinet? I can't think of one person that's got his head screwed on straight there or, has more than a room temperature IQ. What do we directly can do nothing. Yet their power is pervasive and was probably never thought to grow this much by our framers. The only real way we can do that is to change the executive branch. It's a presidential election. That by itself is troubling as well. The framers never thought that the executive would be as powerful as it is now. And it is powerful because it has all these branches of executive authority, all these administrative agencies. And part of that is because the legislature has given them free rein to implement the laws of the legislature without any real checks on it. And they have taken advantage of that. The legislature writes the laws, writes the empowering pieces of them. But we've allowed the administrative state, these executive agencies, to write rules and regulations that essentially are being viewed as laws. And they're not supposed to. And we don't seem to be having a check on that. That's very troubling. Because it is undermining and taking away the power of one of the branches of government. The branch of government that is closest to the people. And it's happening right in front of us. We can't seem to get rid of any of these Jaspers. And the only way we can get these people out, apparently, is to get a different president. And they're going to hold on to this guy, like grim death. They're not going to try anything that would undermine his ability to be president again and act pretty much the same way he is now, which is as a front for what's going on behind the scenes with other people's political ideologies. Now, there's some problems with that. He doesn't seem to be lasting long enough. He seems to have worn out a long time ago. He was never a very useful vessel. And now, if you trot him out without any assistance, chemical, whatever it is, to get him going again, he is not really able to even articulate the agenda. But there's no one else. We have seen this for a while. They can't get around Kamala. Kamala's even worse than Joe in terms of what's going to go on. And then it becomes a big mess. So they're stuck. It's an interesting thing to watch from the outside. But, of course, just because they're stuck doesn't mean it's good for us. Now, I would prefer to have Donald Trump run against Biden than a couple of these other people that are on the outside and the fringes. Newsom, for all the problems that we have with him, because we know what's happening in California, and we see what his philosophy is still a much slicker candidate. He would be a problem we would not like to face necessarily, just because he has the ability to, as my grandmother used to say, pull the wool over people's eyes. And he's slick. So they can't get around Kamala and these kinds of things to bring anybody else up. So we have to do what we can to make sure that Joe has a nice retirement at one of his mansions in Delaware next year. We'll be back. Hello, folks. Yes, I'm stuck in the middle with you. We all appear to be stuck in the middle these days, so thanks for sticking around. I have so many ridiculous stories that affect us in front of me, I don't know where to start. I saved them for this segment, and I realize now there's just too many of them, which is shocking. Let's just get started, because these are things that you need to know. And in no particular order here, let's see. Let's talk about guns, because guns seem to be on the mind of our state legislature in Colorado. And trust me, if you're listening out of state, they're on their mind too, because every time I read something that I used to think was crazy and came only out of California is now coming out of the Colorado state legislature and some surrounding ones. So just because if you don't live in Colorado, don't think you're safe. Trust me. I used to think we weren't that far gone here. Shows what I was thinking. All right. There are two gun violence prevention bills going through. And we talked about these a couple of weeks ago, and I encouraged you guys to look at all these different bills about guns. There's a bunch of them in the Colorado State Legislature. And if you don't get, yourself out there and talk about them to these jokers, they're going to just pass. And you need to talk to Polis, too, because he might, if they do pass, veto one or two of them. I doubt it, but, we got to put on you have to put on the pressure, okay? So there's two gun violence prevention bills. I always like the way they put that. I would prefer to have people violence prevention bills, because I have several firearms, and I have not seen one of them commit a crime yet. Now, I've kept a pretty good eye on them, and I don't let them have the keys to the car. So that may be helpful. But nevertheless, I haven't seen them do a darn thing. And one would help law officials recognize dangerous firearm purchasing patterns. I wonder what that's all about. Now, they want to have a state permit, first of all, in addition to your federal firearms license, to sell firearms. And the permit would make it a felony up to $250,000 in fines if you sold without the state permit, if this goes through. Now, it's unclear how much the state permit's going to cost. I'm sure it'll cost more than you'll want to pay, and it will be something that is easier to revoke. Because, see, right now, the state can't really get involved in that because it's a federal license. I mean, they can mess around with you a little bit, but they can't really get involved with it. Now what they can do is say, oh, that's all fine and good. You got a federal firearms license, but it doesn't mean you can sell in Colorado. Think about that for a minute. Think about what that does. Wonder about how many Colorado inspectors will be showing up at federal firearms license dealers to check and see how they're doing. Yeah. So that's good. Luckily, that's not the worst one. There's also the one we talked about before, and this one is really crazy because it's obvious what's going on. The second bill would require payment card networks, and we talked about this before. I just want to say this is moving forward now. Second bill would require payment card networks like Visa or MasterCard to provide merchant code for businesses that sell guns and ammunition. That would allow banks and credit card companies to recognize purchasing patterns to report them to law officials. Now, what do you think might be a dangerous purchasing pattern? Any ideas? Any ideas at all? Yeah, me either. I mean, I could think of, if I came in and said, say, I would like to buy 100 ARs and have them shipped to El Paso, Texas. That might be a little suspicious. But on the other hand, that's not what's going to happen. And that's not why it's being introduced? It's being introduced, well, for probably 2 or 3 reasons, but I believe one of the main reasons is because under Colorado law, you can't maintain a firearms database. Neither does the feds. You're not supposed to have a database that says you purchased what, when. And they're supposed to get rid of the records when you run a background check. Who knows if they do that? I think they do. The good thing about it is they're usually so disorganized, even if they're not, they won't be able to find them. But nevertheless, this is a way to do it. And they require the private merchant to do it. See, this is another example of what we've been talking about around here, about this attempt by government, federal's doing it a lot, to require private businesses to do the things that the government is not allowed to do and then give it to them. Does that sound right? Of course not. But that's what they're doing. They would have a hard time collecting this information because of the state of Colorado and to some extent federal law. But they can say, oh, you got to collect this, and then if there's dangerous purchases in there, you're supposed to let people know. And they don't give any real definition that I've saw about what's a dangerous firearms purchasing pattern. I perhaps voting Republican and then purchasing firearms, that might be a dangerous one. I don't know. But guys, we got to get with our lawmakers, and at least the few conservatives that we have out there, we need to get with them, and then we need to get with the ones, even if they're not, who might be on the fence and just don't want to have the hassle from people, calling and complaining. We got to do what we can. You guys need to follow this. But that's in Colorado, so we got that going for us. While we're on the topic, our Attorney General here in Colorado, who is, really just a dynamite dude, Phil Weiser, is now joining a lawsuit, or threatening to join a lawsuit, I should say, from 11 other states and the District of Columbia, no surprise, because, it's so safe and they want to keep it that way, to notify the gunmaker Glock. You may be familiar with Glock. I don't know. It's a small town. It's kind of a family operation, but they make firearms. They want them to preserve 37 years of documentation regarding its handguns. Okay. That's because the city of Chicago, another extremely safe place that is just trying to protect itself and its pastoral setting, has a lawsuit against Glock alleging the company had not changed the design of the pistol so that you could not install a, quote, do-it-yourself switch to make it a machine gun. I hate that term. What they're saying is there is a way to mechanically alter the internal workings of the Glock, and some other ones, by the way, so that semi-automatic function is disabled. Now, if I remember right, and I'm no gunsmith, you guys out there, probably some of you are, but it used to be that someone had told me that most of the time that semi-automatic firearms have something added to them, and I've seen this when I'm working on my own firearms, that makes it so they are not fully automatic. And for those of you that have old rifles, old .22 rifles seem to be guilty of this. As they, get older and you've fired them a million times, occasionally the sear in there that keeps it from just going bang, 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 bang wears down, and you have a firearm that when you shoot it every so often, it shoots 2 or 3 times, right? So what they're saying is this is a simple fix that Glock did not do and allows them to become machine guns. I'll read you a quote. Through these practices, Glock knowingly creates, maintains, and contributes to a condition in Chicago that endangers the safety and health of the public. Really, Glock is doing that? Glock is committing all these crimes? Glock is hijacking cars, attacking people, shooting folks along the street, getting in gang fights with people that can't hit each other but hit everybody else? Yeah, that Glock is doing that. These are levels of absurdity that it's hard to even contemplate. They are robbing people of freedom for absurd reasons and control. So Colorado has threatened to join the lawsuit against Chicago. What they're doing is they're lurking in the weeds here with 11 other states to see if this lawsuit in Chicago is going to be successful. Because right now it's going through the courts to see if they can even do that. And you know why? It's because Chicago says that in Illinois you can now sue firearms manufacturers for what happens with their firearms, which used to be a federal concern only, and not really, you weren't able to do it. I mean, if the firearms manufacturer didn't have anything to do with giving you the firearm in some way that they knew that was going to be misused, you couldn't bring a lawsuit. And some of you were saying, don't we have a federal law on that? Yes, we do. This is one of the arguments they're having in court. And what's happening here is these other states are saying, well, we just want to let you know that if this doesn't, go well for you, Glock, in this particular case, then we're going to pile on too. And of course, these are the kinds of things that can end up with enormous verdicts and run a manufacturer, not that they have manufacturing that much in Chicago, but it can cause the firearms business to just not want to be in the United States, which is why the federal government enacted that. I mean, you can imagine the kind of verdicts you're going to get. Look what they're doing to Trump. And, yeah, some of these are big companies. They can't afford like $1 billion verdict. And who knows what would happen in this. So, anyway, just to let you know that there's 11 states out there. And one of them is, of course, Colorado, because Phil Weiser wants to let him know that if this goes his way, he's going to jump right in there with both of his little feet. Oh, good. All right, well, we're on the topic. Let you know, University of Colorado is going to consider a concealed carry firearms ban on campus. This was interesting to me because I'm unaware of that ever being a problem on the Boulder campus. I lived in Boulder quite a while, and I went to school there for quite a while, and I don't remember that being a problem, and I don't remember any recent stories on it being a problem. What they're saying is if you have a concealed permit, both state or federal, you can't carry on campus if this goes through. They have to get in front of the regents of the university, which I don't think they meet until June again. But that's what they're trying to do. And I bring this up not because it is just another attack on gun rights, but tell me where the problem was with this. What are you addressing? What's the point? Help me out here. Show me some incidents that you've had that you're trying to fix. And that are not, even if there are just some isolated incidents. Remember, we don't want the exceptions to become the rule here. I don't think there are any. And one of the regents that's in favor of this said, every time we get together, there are people clamoring, essentially, for us to address guns on campus. Really? I mean, I don't think that's true. Now, there may be a couple of people that show up over and over again, which I might point out to you folks is what happens in your local city councils and county commissioners, is if you don't participate in some of these meetings, and I know it's hard, I understand, and sometimes it's purposely hard because they have meetings at awkward times or they put things that are controversial at the end of the agenda when people have to go home because they have a job the next day. But nevertheless, if you don't, this kind of stuff just starts happening, and it has to be justified. What are you doing this for? Because really they're doing it for, they don't like guns. They really don't like you having them. But they're just trying to just narrow it. And remember that there's another one of those gun laws I told you guys about that makes more and more sensitive areas to prohibit carrying guns if it passes through. Parks, places like that, where you're really safe. I don't understand. There used to be a standard that in order to have legislation be valid, it has to be related to a legitimate government purpose. It can't just be fanciful. It can't just be, we're going to pass a law that says everybody has to wear a blue hat on Fridays. Well, there's no governmental purpose to that. Now, we've let that get stretched pretty thin, but one would think that in order for it to qualify as a legitimate government purpose, you would have to show some harm that's been inflicted and how this legislation would directly impact that harm or that would assist the citizens in some way in being better off. I don't see any of these doing that. I mean, we've left that behind. The whole idea of reason, sanity, logic, it's in the rearview mirror, folks. It's something that other people used to see, and we don't anymore. Now, here's something that's very local for me, but like I said, don't sit and say, oh, well, gee, boy, those guys there in Grand Junction, where Rick's at, they're crazy, but not where I'm at. Oh, yeah, they are. You just might not know about it yet. I mean, because I read a little bit more of this stuff, I see all these things that I used to see in California 2-3 years ago and thought, boy, we're lucky that's not here. Well, it is here. So don't feel too safe. You have to be alert. Now, in my little piece of heaven here, they've decided to consider sanctioned camping to help unhoused residents. Unhoused, of course, being the newest one. Unhoused people are transients, and newcomers are illegal aliens. So as long as you start getting the lingo down, it helps a little bit. The story I hear is from Colorado Public Radio, which I looked up, and they're basically saying that there's been a lot of money spent in Grand Junction on the homeless population lately, and there was a vote, as I remember, rejecting the idea that you couldn't have tents in the city parks during daytime hours. Yeah, they wouldn't do that. They didn't want to ban that. Really? I guess they're afraid maybe somebody set up a gazebo there, with those folding tents might be in charge. I doubt if that was the reason. Now, what they want to do is they want to sanction camping in particular places. In other words, they want to set up zones where people can camp. And they're considering things like an area where you can park your vehicle and live in it without being told to move it, which I would suggest is going to be along the lines of places that are in public. Now, you folks out there may recall that you are the public. And so it's essentially on your property, or certainly where you're going to be. Not your personal property, at least not yet. So they're considering that. There is this trend I've talked about before of people taking very dilapidated RVs and chugging them along and getting them to someplace and then just permanently setting them there. California has had a real problem with this. Apparently, the roadway near Silicon Valley, one of which is along the Pacific there, has these things sitting along the side of the road. Now, you say, oh, well, at least they're out of the weather and this and that. But here's something we always have to remember. Even if we allow electric hookups, let's say we allow electric hookups, free electric, go with it. We all know electricity is made just from the air, just from the air. There's no process to it, no generators or anything. I mean, that's why we can have everything electric, because we don't have to have any grid. But let's say we made that. What about sanitation? What about sanitation? That's an incredibly important part of civilization. Because civilizations get ruined by diseases associated with bad sanitation. Many medieval armies, ancient armies up until relatively close time to us, would be decimated because on the move they did not maintain sanitation in their camps and disease was spread. It's well known that if you besieged some town or castle, if you were there long enough, some kind of pestilence was going to break out. The Romans knew how to stop this a little bit. They were a lot more organized than anybody, and then this knowledge got lost. They made sure that disposal for human waste was kept far away from tents and cooking and things like that. But we sort of dropped that ball later on when people lost a lot of this I could call that quasi-scientific knowledge, because Romans knew it was a problem. They didn't know exactly why. But the Middle Ages, they just, those kinds of things were very hard to get through people's heads. Now apparently it's coming back. What's old is new again. So what do you do about that? I know in California, one of the complaints is that people that live in these areas, these parked areas and so forth, empty their waste into the gutters and places like that. How healthy do you think that turns out to be? Have they heard of dysentery? Some of these diseases are very virulent in those kinds of environments. I mean, that's just that. I mean, there's so many other reasons, but that's a bad idea for everybody. We're already seeing diseases come back into the United States. Tuberculosis is on the rise in some places in the United States. We thought that was completely gone, or very nearly gone. We don't need to keep introducing an environment that is unhealthy, even for the people that you're trying to help, much less everybody around them. That's what things like this do. One last thing. I couldn't believe this one, and I just had to talk about it. There's a bill, I'm sure it's my background that does this. There's a bill also in the Colorado State Legislature that would ban handcuffing people face down on their stomach. In other words, when you prone somebody out and handcuff them, that would be against the law. Now, the chiefs of police, most of which are pretty weaselly because they work for a city manager or something like that, but some of them are pretty good. I shouldn't say that they're all weaselly, but there's a couple of weasels out there. And it would eliminate police officers' ability to subdue a person using a prone restraint. Now, as someone who's wrestled people to the ground myself, sometimes when they're really on the fight, that's the only way that you can get control over them. I mean, everybody knows that. You've got to get somebody down. And this bill would limit that. I'm trying to figure it out because what I read, reading it, it's kind of all over the place in terms of that if you had to use, if there were cases in which use of deadly force would be justified, then you could prone someone out. What does that mean? And if you use this restraint tactic, you have to immediately reposition the person so that they can breathe and so forth. Yes, now there is some problems with people who are face down on the ground and can't breathe. Well, we understand that. It's not particularly common, and it often occurs with people who are on drugs, alcohol, or otherwise compromised. But they want to take that away from the police. Who are these people? So that's what's going on in our legislature. And if you don't live here, doesn't mean it won't start going on in yours. Or maybe it's already gone on. Folks, pay attention. Keep your freedoms alive out there. We'll talk about
Thanks
it
for
next
listening.
week.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.